All right. Welcome to Legally Everywhere, y'all. Where we are what, child? We legally everywhere. We looking into everything. And I don't know if it's just me, but I feel like current events had me by literally the edges, right? Had me by the edges. So I said, you know what? It's time for us to really get into these receipts. What? Because what we eating over here. Tonight, what we're gonna do is it's not about speculation. I don't know if you looked at that cover, but we about to really get into these receipts. Um, tonight's not about speculation. It's not about commentary. That's not what we're gonna do tonight. Tonight, what we're about to do, at least where I'm at, it's nighttime. We're gonna look directly at the United Nations records, right? I pulled them and we're gonna look directly at them and we're gonna read them. Yeah, we're gonna go ahead and read them and see what the UN, the United Nations itself, what they said themselves about the situation involving Iran, right? So everything that we'll be looking at tonight is publicly available. It's publicly available information from United Nations. It's their documentation. We're going to pull it directly from their page. Okay, so I'm going to do screen shares and I'm going to literally put the documents up. We got 4 documents. Okay, this is going to be a much shorter live than some of the other ones because the documents in general are not that long. But we're going to get into these receipts, right? So just to kind of introduce the idea, one of them is a resolution. Okay. One is a public statement, and then there are 2 correspondences. I'm going to show you them in the sequence in which they happen. At that point, right? At that point, I'm going to show you a discussion that was had on an international news site, which holds 2 U.S. officials, right? One was from a previous administration, which will be the Bush administration. And then one of the personnel is from the current administration. And then there is a representative from Iran. And then there is a correspondent who is facilitating the discussion. I think that it's better for you to see the actual UN response before we look at some of the discussion that they're having, because at some point they do reference it. The video for which I will play as an audio at the end is already available on the page as a long form video, or what you consider just a general video on the page. Okay, I'll actually show you what that cover sheet looks like in a moment, just so you know how to find it and how it's indexed. Okay, when I repackage the live, because I know that a lot of you guys like me to chop it up and give you shorts and things like that, little nuggets you can take. I will include it, the visual where you'll hear audio tonight. Okay, just to make sure this live looks good and delicious and scrumptious. Because child, when I say we finna get into these receipts, we finna get into these receipts. So hopefully now that I explained the overall structure, what we'll be doing this evening, the overall flow will feel very comfortable. I like to try to meet all accessibility needs. So I like to tell you up front what you'll experience, how you experience it, so you can decide, how you want to move. But trust me, this is going to probably be less than 20 minutes because we're about to get into it. You ready? Okay. So with that being said, let me see if there's any other note I want to pull up before I pull this PDF up. I kind of also want to make sure that I explain that it's about the sequence of events. So that's why I'm specifically going to show you the order in which the United Nations responded and like the communication that they were having. Because initially when I was going to do this live, I was going to show you the 2 more like publicly pushed documents, but I thought it would be significant for us to just read even the correspondences that they were having with the different parties, right? Because they're United Nations and we kind of want to see what that looks like, right? Another element to the discussion that I wanted to say before I start the actual full-blown presentation, right, is that we want to always look at things in context, right? The UN response didn't just happen like in a vacuum. It happened through a series of like formal communications, which is why I wanted to be as fair to the situation as I possibly could by finding whatever I could find relevant to the US and Iran specifically. So that's what we're pretty much going to do. We're going to walk through those 4 documents. Hopefully that is very clear. Okay. Let's see. There's a statement that was delivered by the UN Security Council. I think we'll pull that one up first. Let's go pull this slide up. Okay, up. They didn't give you the sauce, baby. They didn't gave it to you. Okay, so if you as you look, this is the actual cover page that you saw for this particular video. As you can see, the two main documents would be the Secretary General statement, which came out on February 28th of this year, right? So it's a condemnation of escalation, the call for restraint, emphasis on diplomacy, UN Charter principles being outlined, right? And then more recently, earlier this week, we saw that there was a resolution that was put out and it was adopted. I said, wait a minute, they taking actions. Let us look into all this, right? So we will read that as well. So that talks about regional stability, concerns, protection of civilians in general. We'll read the specific language. You'll actually even see who stated some things like in opposition of certain things. We're going to we get into all of the C's. And that call for de-escalation, right? So you have the core of the United Nations framework. One moment. Okay, so I was able to look and see to make sure you guys are able to see it. I'm going to go ahead and pop back in. Okay, my sound is good. Thank you. Okay, so as we are looking at the core of the UN framework, we have the UN Charter and we have two specific articles. I won't put those articles up today, but we'll see that I'll have that in the video, in the previous video, right? So you have two particular areas in the UN Charter that are of note, relevant to what is happening in Iran. We have Article 2, Part 4, which talks about the use of force, right? And then we have Article 51, which talks about the self-defense debate, right? Because in general, when it comes to diplomacy and just general like interactions with other nations, it's supposed to be a self-defense. Like unless the UN authorizes and say, hey, that's cool. Usually you have to be claiming self-defense for that to be appropriate or acceptable, right? So that's something to look at, which I might pull up, but in consideration of time, I'm just going to give you the overall comprehensive. It is included in the video that I have that's already on the channel. Okay, so the peaceful settlement, right? Avoiding regional war, diplomatic resolution. Just wanted to actually show you this. This is literally a mind map of how I think and process things. I was like, you know what? People probably like that. So let me explain, right? Before we jump into these particular statements. You have the global implication, right? Like, because the question is always, what next? What happens after this, right? What is that next step? How does it impact? On this channel, we talk about power dynamics and we also talk about what happens, what's the impact, who absorbs the impact, right? When people are having their wars or conflicts, whether it's your manager in a company or if it's, let's say, your constituent and it's the government, right? When people are having their discussions and their negotiations, no one's ever going to negotiate to absorb the harm. So who usually absorbs the harm? It's the client. It's the constituent. It's the consumer, right? That's who absorbs the harm because they're often not at the table to negotiate what their experience is going to be. So somebody has to absorb it. nobody typically negotiates them absorbing that, right? So they shift that liability, they shift that experience on to someone else. So the question always for me is, what's the impact? What's the longitudinal impact? What is the implication, right? So right now the conversation is Middle East escalation risk, right? Because so much is going on right now. Literally, I said, you wake up and hate by the edges. You go to sleep thinking one thing, you wake up and it's like, it's actually worse. How? But somehow it is. There's the energy market impact. We know significantly some things have been happening that would impact energy markets. So global impact. And then we're talking about diplomatic pressures, right? When there'll be another live that I do with regards to mediation and negotiation and the conversation of general good faith, right? You want to feel like when you go into a negotiation or a mediation that someone's trying to operate in good faith, right? You can believe that whatever they say they're going to do is what they're going to do. They come in with good intentions. So what happens when it feels like the intentions are not necessarily as good or forthcoming, right? It mars and faces what room sometimes people are willing to, what room and flexibility you might have in a certain situation, right? Because if you can't trust them to do what they say they're going to do, or if you can't trust that you won't be attacked, or if you can't trust that, whatever situation, whether we're talking about global things or we're talking about your everyday situation, that causes some barriers to success, right? I have a whole lot that I'll do on that piece about with regards to like bad faith or someone potentially trying to operate in what they generally call in legal situations good faith or mediation situations. But that is somewhat that longitudinal impact. That is that general, like, what next? Like, what might be the next look? So if you're interested in the conversation I'm talking about that I observed, the debate, which we will play at the end, if you want to see some of the legal documents, or better yet, the open source articles that are referenced that cover some of the key topic areas that we'll hear later, then I recommend that you go ahead, go to the channel and look for this cover. This is the cover page. These are the 3 individuals who are speaking and representing their positions, right? There's a whole 10-minute video. We will hear it auditorily, or we will hear it as an audio at the closure of reading the United Nations responses, okay? So once again, this is a typed out version of the visual graphic that I created. But we're going to go ahead and look at what, right? We're going to go ahead and look at what did the UN say, right? Because that's the part that we're at right now. Let me pull up. So I found a correspondence for February 6th. Kind of leading in. So I'm gonna do it in chronological order so that we can kind of see an actual occurrence of events. I like to read stuff out of chronological order. Okay. So we're gonna do that now. Okay. So as you can see, this is the United Nations page. Okay. And it says that this is February. Whoa there. This is February 6, 2026. This was in New York, United Nations. Okay. Go confirm that you can see what I see. Beautiful. Okay. So note to correspondence. Note from this spokesperson for the Secretary General on the U.S.-Iran talks. Okay. And it tells you exactly who this was delivered by. Okay. Farhan Haq, Deputy Spokesperson for the Secretary General. It states, the Secretary General welcomes today's resumption of talks between the Islamic Republic of Iran and the United States in hopes that we will help reduce regional tensions and prevent a broader crisis. The Secretary General is grateful to countries in the region for their efforts to help make these talks possible and to Oman for hosting them. The Secretary General has consistently advocated for de-escalation and the peaceful settlement of disputes in accordance with the UN Charter. All concerns can and should be addressed through peaceful dialogue. This, in fact, was the correspondence on February 6th. Okay? Note to correspondence. Okay? We see that here. This is February 6th of this year, 2026. Okay? That's host resolution. That's the wrong one. I want to do it out of sequence. Okay. So, on February 26th, or basically February 28th, 2006, right? Secretary General remarks for the Security Council meeting on the situation in the Middle East as delivered. Okay. Mr. President, Excellencies, ladies and gentlemen, I will speak directly to three areas today: the principles, the facts, and the way out. First, the principles. The UN Charter provides the foundation for the maintenance of international peace and security. Article 2 of the Charter clearly states all members shall refrain in their international relations from the threat or use of force against the territorial integrity or political independence of any state. End quote. International law and international humanitarian law must always be respected. That is why, since this morning, I have condemned the massive military strikes by the United States and Israel against Iran. I also condemned the subsequent attacks by Iran, violating the sovereignty and territorial integrity of Bahrain, Iraq, Jordan, Kuwait, Qatar, Saudi Arabia, and the United Arab Emirates. Sorry, my screen blurred on my end. Where are we? Where is it? Okay. We are witnessing a grave threat to international peace and security. Military action carries the risk of igniting a chain of events that no one can control in the most volatile region of the world. Let me be clear. There is no viable alternative to the peaceful settlement of international disputes. Lasting peace can only be achieved through peaceful means, including genuine dialogue and negotiation. Mr. President, second, the facts. The situation on the ground is very fluid. There are many unconfirmed reports. Here's what we know. About 20 cities across Iran, including Tehran, Isfahan, Qom, Shahir, and Tabriz, I apologize in advance for me butchering anybody's country's name, have reportedly been attacked. In Tehran, large explosions were reported in the district that includes the presidential palace and the compounds of the supreme leader. Several high-ranking officials have reportedly been killed, including, according to the Israel sources, Iran's supreme leader, Ali Khamenei, and that I am not in a position to confirm. Iran airstrikes or airspace been closed, and the country is under a near total internet blackout. The attacks have reportedly caused significant civilian casualties. According to Iranian media, an airstrike killed at least 85 people and injured many more at a girls' school in Manab, Hormogan province. Okay. And a school in Tehran was also reportedly hit, causing 2 deaths. Mr. President. Military action is expanding rapidly across the region, creating an increasingly volatile and unpredictable situation and heightening the risk of miscalculation. According to Israel sources, 85 people have been injured in Iran's subsequent strikes on Israel, and there were also impacts to the occupied West Bank. Iran has announced that in reaction to U.S. and Israel airstrikes, it targeted U.S. military assets in the region. These strikes have reportedly hit civilian area and infrastructures in the country that I have already mentioned. Indirect impacts of falling debris was also reported in Lebanon and Syria. Most Gulf states successfully intercepted the Iranian strikes. However, the UAE reported that one civilian was killed by debris from an intercepted missile. In Iraq, there are reports of drone and missile attacks from both sides. There are also reports that Iran is closing the Strait of Hormuz for international shipping. Mr. President, the U.S. and Israel attacks occurred following the third round of indirect talks between the U.S. and Iran, mediated by Oman. Preparations have been made for technical talks in Vienna next week, followed by a new round of political talks. I deeply regret that this opportunity of diplomacy has been squandered, Mr. President. Third, the region and the world need a way out now. I call for de-escalation and the immediate cessation of hostilities. The alternative is a potential wider conflict with grave consequences for civilians and regional instability. I strongly urge all parties to return immediately to the negotiating table, notably on the Iran nuclear program. I note that the U.S. president has reportedly talked with the leaders of Saudi Arabia, Qatar, and the United Arab Emirates. Iran's foreign minister have reportedly spoken to his counterparts in the GCC countries and Iraq. Everything must be done to prevent a further escalation. To this end, I call on all member states to strictly uphold their obligation under international law, including the UN Charter, to respect and protect civilians in accordance with international humanitarian law and to ensure nuclear safety. Let us act responsibly and together to pull the region and our world back from the brink. Thank you. This is the remarks of the Security Council meeting on the situation, right? So this is February 28, 2006. Okay. And we can see that here. So at this point, we have 2 more correspondences, and then we are good to go. Well, one more correspondence and then the resolution. We're almost there. Okay. On March 10th, 2026, let's make sure it's visible on your side. Readout of the Secretary General telephone call with H.E. Mr. Saeed Abbas Al-Araghchi, Minister for Foreign Affairs of the Islamic Republic of Iran. This is the statement from March 10, 2026, approximately 4 days ago. The readout states, the Secretary General held a telephone call with H.E. Mr. Saeed Abbas Al-Araghchi, Minister of Foreign Affairs of the Islamic Republic of Iran. They discussed the current military escalation in the region. The Secretary General reiterated his position as articulated in previous statements. He recalled the need for all sides to fully respect international law and international humanitarian law, as well as to refrain from any attacks against civilians and civilian infrastructure. He also expressed deep concern at the regional spillover and the impact of ongoing conflicts on the global economy. This was, in fact, a readout, on March 10th, 2026, approximately 4 days ago from the United Nations, right? So this is from the Secretary General's telephone call, okay? As you see it here. Now we're going to go look at the actual resolution that was just sent out. Okay, we're going to look at this resolution. I told y'all we're going to get into these receipts. We're going to get into these receipts. Hello? Put the wrong one up. Okay. What's this? It have name. I'm gonna pull this one up. All right. As you see it here. Confirm. Okay, beautiful. Okay, so y'all, we getting into these receipts. Are we not? Okay, because what I tell y'all, that's what we do over here. So on March 11th, the very next day, right? The very next day, which is 3 days previous from today, right? So 3 days prior. Secretary Council adopts resolution 2817 in 2026, condemning Iran's egregious attacks, end quote, against neighbors as Middle East violence rapidly escalates. Okay. The Security Council today adopted a resolution condemning Iran's, quote, egregious attacks, end quote, against its regional neighbors amid rapid spiraling violence in the Middle East, while rejecting a second draft tabled by the Russian Federation. Okay, let's see if we can do it this way. The 15-member council adopted Resolution 2817, 2006, to be issued as S/res, which is the resolution, 2817, by the vote of 13 in favor to none against, with 2 abstentions, right? So those abstentions would be China and then the Russian Federation. It comes as the war, which began with Israel and the United States airstrikes against Iran on the 28th of February, nears its 2-week mark and has spread to nearly a dozen nations across the already fragile Middle East region. By the terms of the resolution, the Council condemns, end quote, or quote, in the strongest terms, end quote, Iran's attacks against Bahrain, Kuwait, Oman, Qatar, Saudi Arabia, and the United Arab Emirates and Jordan, and reiterated its strong support for those countries' sovereignty, territorial integrity, and political independence. It specifically condemned Iran's attacks against residential areas and civilian objects, demanding their immediate cessation, right? While also demanding that Tehran halt its threatening provocation and actions aimed at interfering with maritime trade, as well as support to proxy groups across the region. Quote, the message is clear, end quote, said Bahrain's representative, welcoming the council's adoption and the text sweeping global support. Quote, the international community is resolute in rejecting these Iranian unjust, hostile acts that are targeting sovereign countries and that threaten the stability of their people, end quote. High number of co-sponsors of the text reflect world's, quote, collective conscious, quote, end quote. noting that nearly 140 member states co-sponsored the resolution. He said that high number reflects the world's collective conscience. The Gulf region is a pillar of global security, trade, and economic stability. He added, emphasizing that protecting the Middle East is therefore in the entire world's interest. Quote, at this crucial moment, it is imperative to listen to the voices of the region, end quote, said Denmark's representative, condemning Iran's attack and demanding that they cease immediately. She points to the large number of delegations across the council and the wider UN membership supporting the text. Quote, every day passing, we are witnessing a further destabilization of the already volatile and tense situation, end quote, she said, echoing calls from maximum restraint, protection of civilians, and respect for the international law. Quote, this war, which poses grave risk to regional security, must end now, end quote, said France's representative. Quote, only respect for international law and diplomacy can ensure the lasting security and stability of the region, end quote. Stressing that Tehran has vastly expanded the war in recent days, he declared. Quote, Iran bears a heavy responsibility for the current escalation, quote. He added that France has long been concerned by Iran's nuclear threats and that its support for regional proxies. Quote, Iran shoots in all directions, end quote, stressing the representative of the United States Council President for March, explaining his vote in his national capacity. Nations that previously had serious disagreement with each other have now joined together and spoke with one voice. Bahrain itself, a victim of these attacks, drafted and led the negotiations on the text, which was supported by a record number of co-sponsors. The representative of Libya, also speaking for the Democratic Republic of the Congo and Somalia, said those countries voted in favor to reflect, quote, our principled commitment to diplomacy, dialogue, de-escalation, and respect for international law as the only viable path to peace and stability in the Middle East, end quote. He also stressed that the council must not endorse interpretation of Article 51 that expands beyond the, quote, core principle, end quote, contained in the UN Charter, or that, quote, risk eroding longstanding constraints on the use of force, end quote. The representative of the United Kingdom, Greece, Panama, Lactiva, I'm butchering names, I apologize, and Colombia also noted that they voted in favor of the resolution, right? So here appears to be some opposition. Biased text doesn't give full picture. United States, Israel must cease unauthorized military strikes immediately. So China representative who abstained pointed out that the United States and Israel launched military strikes without council authorization. Right, we talked about the UN Charter. So without council authorization and must cease their actions immediately. While stressing that the sovereignty, security, and territorial integrity of the Gulf Arab states must be fully respected, he cautioned that the resolution just adopted, quote, does not fully reflect the root cause and overall picture of the conflict in a balanced manner, end quote. The representative of Pakistan, who voted in favor of the text, said he would also support a second draft to be tabled by the Russian Federation. Quote, to our deep regret, the resolution that just passed is expressed in a biased and one-sided tone, end quote, said Moscow representatives prior to introducing his country's separate text. Reading Bahrain's resolution without context would lead one to believe that Tehran, with no provocation, out of pure malice, decided to strike targets across the region for no reason. He said the need to protect civilians is also presented in a resolution in an extremely one-sided way, as if Israel and the United States had not killed men, women, and children in Iran and cynically murdered the country's supreme leader. Quote, The council's adoption of the text could be interpreted by bad faith actors, and first and foremost by those who started this war to continue their act of aggression against Iran, end quote, he warned. To those ends, he introduced a separate draft resolution, which he described as a, quote, impartial document aimed at urgently de-escalating the situation, end quote. The text is simple, direct, and unequivocal, and intentionally does not name any parties to the conflict, he said. Second draft presented by Russian Federation rejected draws mixed reaction. Voting a second time, the council rejected Moscow's draft resolution by vote of 4 in favor, China, Pakistan, Russian Federation, and Somalia, to 2 against, which would be Latvia, United States, with 9 abstentions. So with the abstentions, you have Iran, Colombia, Dominican Republic of Congo, Denmark, France, Greece, Liberia, Panama, and the United Kingdom. Quote, we're deeply disappointed, end quote, said the Russian Federation delegate, taking the floor again, noting that many council members' positions are dictated purely by the short-term political interests, bloc solidarity, and, quote, the fear that they might fall out of favor with the elder friends, end quote. He added, this is not even double standards. We are living through the looking glass, end quote. China's representative also expressed regret that Moscow's draft resolution was not adopted, declaring, quote, this is a war that should not have happened, a war that benefits no one, end quote. While welcoming the Russian Federation's desire to contribute to responding to events in the region, Bahrain's representative said that his delegation abstained from the vote because, quote, because the draft resolution adopts a general tone, which is in no way reflects the dangerous military escalation currently besetting the region, end quote. This draft, quote, this draft resolution says nothing about the overwhelming responsibility borne by the Iran in the current escalation, including its indiscriminate and unjustified attacks against its regional neighbors who pose no threats, end quote, said France delegate, who also abstained. Despite its good intentions, the Russian text was not a viable basis for bringing the council together and providing the response the circumstances demand, he said. The representative of the United States said that, quote, the Russian Federation knew it did not have the votes to adopt its resolution today, yet it insisted on proceeding to a vote, end quote. Latvia's delegate who voted against the Russian Federation proposed text said it was tabled by a permanent member of the council who has for years been using force against civilians and civilian infrastructures in a sovereign country. Quote, and Iran is now attacking its neighbors with the same weapons, end quote. She stressed, describing Moscow's text as a deeply, quote, cynical one, end quote. Quote, it is impossible to overlook the hypocrisy of Russia's presenting itself here as the guardian of international peace and security, agreed the representative of the United Kingdom. Okay. Israel welcomes clear condemnation of Iran's attack. Iran declares manifest injustice against his country. Also addressing the council today were the representatives of Israel and Iran. The former welcoming the Gulf states' initiative to condemn Iran's attack said the council message is clear. Quote, targeting civilians is wrong, targeting cities is wrong, and Iran must stop, end quote. Stressing that Iran used diplomacy as cover while it fortified its nuclear program, he rejected Iran's assertion that its nuclear program is exclusively peaceful. Quote, that is simply not true, end quote, he said. Quote, today's adoption is a serious setback to the council's credibility and leaves a lasting stain on its record, end quote, said Tehran delegate. The very state responsible for the brutal war of aggression against his country, the United States, sits in the chamber as council president, abusing his position while obstructing every effort to bring an end to the barbaric war. Quote, let me make it clear. This resolution is a manifest injustice against my country, the main victim of a clear act of aggression. And you have heard the reading of the resolution from the United Nations with regards to what is happening with the current war with the United States and Israel against Iran. You have heard it here. What we are going to do now is we're going to go back to the PowerPoint that initially I created for us. Well, actually, let's go ahead and call it the PDF, right? So we went ahead and we were able to kind of go in and look, right? We were able to read the statements. We actually read 4 of them as opposed to just the 2. I wanted to give us the full context of some of the other discussions that they were having, right? From there, we were able to kind of look at some of the framework elements. Well, we weren't able to look at it, but we kind of were able to gauge some of the position that the United Nations had. There was some discussion on Article 2 and some discussion on Article 51, which we saw here, which is the discussion of use of force and the self-defense argument, right? Because generally, the reason a country is allowed to respond is because what it is a response. It is an action that occurred after another action. I'm allowed to defend myself, right? But you can't say that I won on offense and say that that's defensible unless you're saying the UN agreed and said, yes, we support that, right? So there's points of discussion and conversation to be had, right? Going back to the original discussion. I'm going to play this audibly in the background. This is 9 minutes. So you can hear some discussion from representatives. You will see that this party here is part of the current administration. So as you can see above, it says it's Washington, D.C. And then the person in the middle is representing Tehran, right? So in Iran. And then we have someone who's showing that they're coming from the United States, but they're based out of Virginia. They're a part of the Bush administration. You will hear that there is some discussion that is made about mission accomplished, the term. So I did place that visual even in the cover. Essentially, when you hear mission accomplished, it's usually frequently used as nowadays, it's kind of more so a phrase used to state that pretty much someone claimed victory a little too early. And that was something that was said during the time of the Bush administration, like mission accomplished. We will definitely be able to break down the visuals. I did provide some of that historical information in that video with this as the cover, but we will listen to the audio portion of them having the discussion. I also showed that we can see right around February 6th, what we also just saw, what we had a document that came out of the UN that was happening around that time as well. An executive order that happened here in the United States under President Trump's administration. February 6th of this year said address threats to the United States by the government of Iran, right? So before those strikes actually occurred, and before the war, this actually was already put in as an executive order. There's several executive orders, and we will be diving in those, as you know, on this channel as well. But just to kind of put some of those foundations there, those are some opportunities to look into some other things that might help you actually process and think about how you want to look at the events that are occurring, right? So we're going to go ahead and play some of the audio. Let's see. Is there anything else I really wanted you to see? Okay. Yep, we're going to come to the legal questions pretty soon. Okay, so you see that we do have 3 legal questions. Was the conflict legally justified? Was the response proportional? And were diplomatic options exhausted, right? Because essentially when we're talking about the United Nations, the idea is to be peaceful. The idea is to come to a resolution. The idea is that, you know, you shouldn't have fear that another place is going to come and do anything to you. And there should be a certain level of checks and balances and accountability that happens, right? So let us listen to this discussion now that we have actually seen and read what the UN response was, right?
And killed by the Iranian regime, their own.
So this is the Alizara recording. This is a live recording that I was able to do on the 12th of March, which was 2 days ago. And I'm going to go ahead and play it for you right now.
Yes, thousands of people have been killed by the Iranian regime, their own people. Of course, human rights, this is an organization that's been conducting terrorism in the region and supporting state-sponsored terrorism for really 47 years. That's very clear. It's attacking American soldiers. It's killed. It was behind the U.S.'s cold attack and the rest of it. So to defend the Iranian regime that is a threat to world and regional security, to me, is unbelievable that certainly any American could support that. Keep in mind that the guest from the United States works for a Secretary of State that he's concerned about money that spent trillions of dollars in a war effort that failed to occupy Iraq and Afghanistan and lied in the United Nations about weapons of mass destruction. So this is a curious turn of events on this. But the fact before us today, this off-ramp, we're on the ramp. We're on the way to 4 to 6 weeks to eliminate this regime.
Mission accomplished.
Yeah, okay. That was under your watch.
All right, let's give Fayed a chance to.
That was so you have
accomplished.
Okay, gentlemen, we'll have time. Mission accomplished. To each of you. Let's have two guests representing Iran here. So you have the mission accomplished was a statement by President Bush to your viewers now.
Understood.
And Secretary Powell and Mr. Wilkinson worked for the president that said that. The difference is President Trump will accomplish the mission. Again, we haven't even been in 2 weeks into this conflict. Our mission here is to destroy the military capabilities of a regime that is brutal, barbaric to its own people and threatens security.
Okay, you made that point clear, Adolfo.
Yesterday 135 countries lined up on a resolution.
We'll talk about that in a moment. Let's go over to Fadi in Tehran. I know you want to come back in on some of those things, but I do want to put a point to move the discussion along. What will be Iran's position on a unilateral U.S. announcement of an end to the war? Will Iran accept that and say, fine, if the U.S. says it's mission accomplished, we just walk away?
They need to make sure two things happen. The first thing is that they want to make sure that the country is not attacked by two nuclear regimes every few months. You cannot run a country when the United States and Israel attack you whenever they want illegally to
How would Iran guarantee that?
They could say it. Trump could come and say that we are done with attacking Iran. They could say that as long as I'm president.
Would Iran trust the word of Donald Trump, given the history of this?
That would help. Trusting Trump would be a difficult thing to do, but him saying it would be useful. The second thing would be the creation of a setup to compensate Iran. The Trump administration and Netanyahu have devastated Iran's civilian infrastructure. They have killed thousands of innocent people. They need to pay. They need to pay Iran. They need to compensate Iran. And it could be done through leveling tax on ships going through the Strait of Hormuz. It could be done through different things. But until they realize that changing Iran's government is a pipe dream, they will try to repeat this huge mistake again. Trump has managed to unite Iranians more than any Iranian politician could ever do. They're basing their policies on ideas that are not going to work, and they're killing a lot of people in the process. Iran needs to make sure that this stops.
All right. Very, very briefly, I repeat briefly, Adolfo, I want to give you a chance to answer one point before I go to Lawrence, but please, very briefly, do you see any scenario in any parallel universe, shall we say, in which the Donald Trump administration will accept those kinds of conditions from Iran? Briefly, please.
Absolutely. No, that is the most ludicrous statement I have heard from a totalitarian, brutal regime. The compensation will come with the elimination of the regime's.
Genocidal people.
Genocidal is your dictatorship turning on your own people, and your dictatorship you sponsor terrorism throughout the region.
All right, it's a good time out, gentlemen. Let's take a moment to give Lawrence a chance to speak, because he's been waiting patiently. Lawrence, if the U.S. would not accept those kinds of Iranian conditions to end the conflict, what are the options open? You're somebody who has obviously a military background and experience. Does the US move up the escalation ladder? What are the next steps up the escalation ladder?
I don't know if you heard Senator Blumenthal the other day, but he was absolutely apoplectic when he came out of the intelligence briefing about possible ground troops on the ground in Iran. That would be an absolute disaster. It would make Iraq and Afghanistan combined look like a cakewalk.
Do you think that's serious?
Where we could, we could go there. Trump has said things like that. And I'm hearing the rumors from the Pentagon that they are contemplating using ground forces. This would be the ruin of the region and our presence there. We would never be invited back, as it were. But let me just say one thing in particular. I'm speaking on behalf of the Iranian people who are dying under our bombs. I'm not speaking in behalf of the regime. And I'm speaking on behalf of the American people who, in poll after poll now, register such majorities as 75% of them, including many Republicans and many MAGA Republicans, who are opposed to this war for very different reasons, but nonetheless they're opposed. They're right, and the rest are wrong.
Adolfo, let's let Lawrence finish the thought, Adolfo. I'll come back to you. Go ahead, Lawrence.
And we're not going to get out of it in one piece.
Okay, and I'll give you a chance to come back in then, Adolfo.
Yeah, this is the man that just spoke, who was working for the administration that put ground troops in Iraq and Afghanistan. This is the man that supported all the wrong
So I should know how much a mistake it was, shouldn't I?
Well, this is the man, and this is the man who this was the man who worked for chief of staff who lied to the United Nations. Now, here is the reality of what is going on. Iranian people, Iran has been behind terrorism throughout the region. It is killing its own people, and it is a threat to world security. And President Trump's strategy is to neutralize it. What will come next is up to the Iranian people. And that's been very clear.
All right, I think you've made that. We've got a brief minute left, so I want to give Fuad a chance to come back on this. Fuad, in 60 seconds.
These people live in pipe dreams. Iranians are more united than ever. They are coming to the streets every night in millions. This is what Netanyahu asked them to do. But they're coming and shouting against Netanyahu and Trump and people like your other guests that are warmongers. Iran has
Is Iran not also shooting itself in the foot with the moves we've seen at the United Nations Security Council? A lot of countries lining up against Iran.
It's sad. Iran did not want to see this. They need to blame Trump and Netanyahu for starting this war. We don't like even American soldiers get killed. These are young people with young families. They shouldn't die for the Epstein class. The Epstein class is killing little Iranian girls and raping little American girls.
Okay, I'm afraid we are out of time. I know that we would all love to continue this discussion further, and I certainly have a lot more points, but perhaps we'll all have the chance to come back and the focus to come back and discuss this in goodwill again. Thank you all to our guests, Adolfo Franco, Fuad Izadi, and Lawrence Wilkerson. And thank you too for watching. You can see the show again anytime.
Okay, So we were able to hear that particular discussion, right, which allows us to just jump in and look at the three questions that I initially, posed at the start of this live, right? And I'll just kind of leave you with those questions, right? Just three simple things. Now that we've kind of also heard a little bit of debate and discussion, right? The reason I wanted to show that piece was because one, it was very recent, very relevant to reading the actual articles. It's what made me want to go back and say, like, well, what exactly did the UN say when I saw that? I'm very big on saying, like, don't just jump into, oh, I see this on social media. Oh, I see this discussion. Go read the documents for yourself. And it brings us to the point of asking the legal question, was the conflict legally justified? Was the response that was carried out, was it proportional to the situation, right? We understand that there was a lot that happened, right? Several strikes that were employed. There was lots of, let's say, deletion, because we're on YouTube, like deletion that occurred. There were lots of damage to homes, residential places, schools, lots of lives that have been lost that cannot be, brought back. Lots of people are harmed, maimed. The response, right? Was it proportional? As far as diplomatic options, we think from the perspective of like mediation, negotiation, when someone, when you're interacting with someone, you want to feel like they're operating in good faith, right? Even through the lens of mediation as a mediator who's been doing it for several years now. One thing that you often are asked was, did they mediate in good faith? Do you feel like they kind of went in and, were being honest and genuine about what they were doing, really came in and putting forth an effort, right? When you read the resolution information, it did speak in detail saying that there were negotiation talks that failed 3 times, right? And they're optimistic towards another conversation with regards to specific things they were looking at. They were looking at specific discussion with regards to the nuclear program, but it seems like also on the table, of course, would be the resolution of this particular type of conflict, right? So when you have certain kind of things that are happening, right, do diplomatic options seem to be accessible, or are they kind of like exhausted, right? If you're, let's say you're a nation, or let's make it less global and make it more like individual person situation. That's a little bit more relatable, right? If you're having a conflict with someone and like go on national television and say they obliterated, all your resources, and they like took you out, or took your, leaders or best friends or supervisors out of the run for a race or something like that, right? And that's very much diluting what actually happened, but just to take it away a little bit, right? To make it easier to process. Would you be willing to kind of have certain kind of conversations, right? That's not a question that I can necessarily make, right? We're not in those particular positions or in those rooms to have those conversations, but it's something to kind of think about. Did you lay a foundation for a mediation and negotiation to actually occur and be successful? Because we also have to keep in mind, it was discussed that they were in a process of discussion, right? When those strikes were employed, right? So it was like something along the lines that they had 14 days, on the 7th day, these strikes were actually employed. I was watching some interesting earlier, some discussion, more so an interview with the executive of the United States. So President Trump was speaking in some detail about, I need to go first. If I didn't go first, we don't know what would have happened to us. Well, is that defensible by law in accordance with like Article 51, where it says it must be self-defense justification, right? Use of force, certain things like we talk about nuclear programs or missiles being employed in areas where civilians may be, right? Use of force, strategy. When you consider all of these elements, would you be comfortable going into a mediation with someone? Would you feel like they're operating in good faith if you were in a negotiation with them and then that occurred? Conversely, a lot of assets that were held in other places, right? The US has lots of assets in other places. A lot of those have been under scrutiny, have been, had things happen, right? So that was a piece of the resolution saying, like, hey, these strikes, right, are coming from every which way in this particular region, right, as a response to what the US did to them. They kind of say, okay, you have these assets in these different places, I'm going for those, right? But those assets are in other places, so other people have not been brought into the conversation, maybe when they didn't want to be, right? So now the United Nations is saying, hey, what are we going to do collectively? They're saying at this point, based off documentation that was just read, that they are condemning such actions, right? Initially, they were saying they didn't like what was happening to Iran. They didn't agree with it, right? They said in opposition. Then once stuff started popping up in their actual backyards, they're like, oh, wait a minute, this is being truly condemned, from a perspective of now we're condemning what Iran is doing. So once again, it's very interesting information, but I was very curious what the United Nations was saying, because you generally think, okay, this will be a space where there will be talks and movements towards a resolution. There would be, creative opportunities employed so that, we can not have the kinds of things that are happening internationally occurring. And with that being said, that is the live for tonight. I wanted to go ahead and read what was actually being written on the United Nations websites, right? What they put down on paper, not necessarily the speculations, not a lot of debate back and forth about politics and rhetoric and all of that. I was very curious what they said. So I wanted to go look it up. I'm always reading articles, right? But we get a lot of sources. Sometimes, it's just important just to go look at the primary source and see what it is that they actually said, because we did see a lot of conversation about what good faith, communications, right? Bad faith actors or bad actors. We saw a lot of discussion about the United Nations charters, those specific articles. We saw a lot of discussion about that, right? So with that being said, it's always important just to go look at the primary source. Hopefully you found this to be helpful. I had started working on some stuff and doing mind maps, trying to track things. I'm like, oh, you know what? Maybe people would benefit or enjoy seeing like how my mind processes things and how I map, the different things that I come across. So I said I would share those things on live with you guys. I will take this and chop it up because I know y'all like it chopped and diced. Well, because we in the kitchen. So hopefully you enjoyed this live. If you like content like this, go ahead and like the video so YouTube knows to push it out to other people who might also be interested in this kind of content. If you feel like you really like this content and you want to stay tuned with what I have going on, because I am forever tracking, mapping, putting things together, trying to have these available sources in a very digestible way, because I really do feel like it's not a resource unless you know how to use it. So yes, the information that I pull and put on my site is always open access, publicly available types of information. People don't always know how to digest it. So I just want to kind of help be the teeth that helps you be able to chew and process the information, right? Because sometimes it can be scary to kind of like be like, okay, well, what's going on? I don't know what's going on. Like I said, I always joke, but it had me by the edges. Like it's very uncomfortable time, right? We live in unprecedented times. And anytime we can have a little bit more information, it gives us an opportunity to process and digest what we are experiencing in our life a little bit easier and a little bit more comfortably when like, okay, I have some information, right? It allows you to be able to control a little bit more of what you experience or how you experience it better yet, right? You get to have a little bit more say, which will help you in your coping process. And so in whatever ways I can help you kind of cope with what is going on, I love to do it. It help you be able to figure out like, what do you want to do with this information, right? Whether it's saying I need to be more informed, so I can share information, whether you're saying, okay, this is helping me feel more informed, so I know maybe some areas I want to research further, or maybe how I might make different movements when it comes to seasons to vote, right? There's a plethora of things that you might choose to do. Everyone is different. That's why it's called a receipt buffet. Everybody's going to come, everybody can get a little bit of something, but we might not all get the same exact thing. That's okay. As long as you feel nourished by the experience, that's perfect. So once again, it's Legally Everywhere. Where we are what? We legally everywhere, child. We're looking into everything. This evening, we was looking at the United Nations because I was curious. What are y'all saying with all this stuff's going on? Because they had us by the edges. You see? The edges for 2 weeks. 2 weeks straight. As a people across the board, even when we went to go back and look at, if you're kind of following this content I've been following with regards to what's happening with Iran, I used some historical markers. We talked about Vietnam not that long ago, and how the people said, hey, we didn't have an issue with the other people. We were kind of just following the orders that were set forth. You hear similar dialogue now, right? Not saying that's exactly the same, but it's just very interesting when you look at the tones, the undertones. With this audio that I played from the video, there was comparisons between what's currently happening and what happened during the Bush administration, when we had a previous war, right? War in the Middle East. There's also other comparisons that were made with regards to, right, the Soviet Union, right? That was actually made on my page. So we have these historical markers, and helps kind of triangulate certain patterns, behaviors, tendencies, which helps us be a little bit more comfortable with digesting what we see happening in modern day, in current times, like really, literally on our timeline. So once again, if you like this kind of content, I do it in my spare time, but I definitely budget time to do this content. If you like this content, like the video, share, subscribe, all those good things, because it lets YouTube know that there are people who enjoy this content, and it finds other people who might like this content, allows them to have access to it, and we can continue to build the community that way. Once again, thank you all for being with me this evening. I know that there are 20 countries that watch my content. On average, about 3,000 people every month are watching. So salutations, and whatever is most appropriate where you're from. Thank you so much for coming to my channel and allowing me to share with you the things that I was able to discover, things that I have been digesting and chomping on myself. And once again, I will see you in the next video, because we'll be legally everywhere, looking into everything. This has been a lovely evening. I feel nourished by this information. I hope you feel the same way. I'll see you in the next video next time.